Hey, what's up, everyone? Draking back again, here to tell you that you should be reading Dragonsdawn. So, Dragonsdawn is a 1998 novel written by the late Anne McCaffrey, and is part of the much larger Dragon Riders of Pern series, which takes place, in the future on a distant planet where we have kind of an agrarian society that kind of has lived on this world for, depending on when the timeline during the book, could live there for a few hundred years, 1,000 years, and basically every few generations they have to fight what is called thread, which is kind of this biological menace that falls from the sky, and basically kind of consumes biological mass, and the only thing that can kill it is either water or fire. And what they have done is kind of retroactively created dragons out of these indigenous life forms, which they've come to call, initially they called them dragonettes, and have now become known as fire lizards, that could produce flame. Have evolved on this planet, so to kind of combat, so they could survive this airborne menace, so to speak. And this story essentially follows the first colonists. Now, it's not the first book in the series, but it's the first full-length novel in terms of chronology in this series that follows the initial colonists who came to this planet to colonizing it, not knowing about the issues with this planet. It seems very pristine, seems very perfect. They notice in terms of geology and kind of the biology that seems to be strange gaps of life in this planet's kind of history, and they don't really know why. Comes to find out that every so often these organisms fall from the sky and essentially consume life, and only certain species can survive due to their biological adaptations to survive it. So they kind of find out the hard way when they get there. After a while, everything's going great, everything's hey fine, fantastic, and then when thread falls, they're starting to suffer the consequences. And then they started noticing that certain organisms in the environment can survive, that these fire lizards, which seems to work very well with humans. They're almost like, it seems like on par with the intelligence of dolphins, which, by the way, they even brought dolphins and have genetically enhanced them so they can now speak and kind of help work with them, the humans, to kind of build this foundation of the civilization. And they've kind of started forming these bonds with these smaller animals, these indigenous life forms, and start to realize that they themselves can, withstand this biological menace. And they realize that they don't have enough resources to combat this threat on the long term. And they have, like skids that can fly, they have flamethrowers, but these are kind of short-term solutions. They realize that as time goes on, they're going to probably start losing some of their technology, and that they're going to need to find a more natural way of combating this threat. So essentially, they take these small fire lizards, as it were, and they engineer them. They make them larger, they make them bigger, they make them, stronger. They, increase their ability to produce fire. And when you're all said and done, you have this large, four-legged creature with wings, long neck, reptilian in appearance, that can breathe fire. What does that look like? Well, it looks like a dragon, and the same thing was thought by these colonists, so they start calling them dragons. So these are not dragons of old. These are not kind of mythical creatures. They're essentially genetically modified aliens that just act like dragons. So hey, they're dragons. And what they have done, they form bonds with some of the people they come in contact. They call it impressing, and they will impress upon someone upon their hatching, and that person basically formed a lifelong bond with them. And they become like the Dragon Riders, hence the Dragon Riders of Pern. In addition, these dragons have the ability to go in between, which is kind of between time. So they can actually jump through time. So it allows them, it makes them very resourceful. And when you read kind of the books that take place later on in the history of this world, you see these dragon riders, this whole kind of culture that surrounds them very much realized. But in this story, you see how it starts out. You see the beginnings of it. And what's very interesting about this story is that, it's not the first time you see a story where people go to a new planet, they colonize it, and they find that there's something biologically there that, they did not, expect, or kind of ill-equipped to deal with. When I did the first episode of You Should Be Reading, I did The Legacy of Hero, which is very much a similar kind of thing. People from Earth, they go to another planet, colonize it, and surprise, surprise, the biology there isn't all hunky-dory. But here, what makes the story different is that the biology is not just an animal that's just, predating on the colonists. It doesn't have that kind of creature feature quality to it. It is kind of like an unthinking, amoral, just kind of like indifferent organism that's there. So it's really more like a natural disaster than it is, yes, the threat is alive, but it's not conscious. It's not like attacking specific people. It's just falling from the sky, almost like snow. And whatever it touches, it kind of destroys, essentially. So you think of it more as like a natural disaster. And instead of, trying to conquer nature, trying to, be like, frontiersmen type, they basically look at nature and work with it. They utilize what's already there and enhance what's already there. And this could easily be a story of science gone wrong. They make the fire lizards bigger and stronger. They can kind of jump through time. You could easily see this story going a completely different way, where now the fire lizards become these big dragons. They go on a rampage. They start killing people. It could have easily gone that way. And I'm not going to say that I'm above those kinds of stories, because as I say that out loud, I'm like, man, that sounds like a cool story too. But what I found interesting that, Anne McCaffrey did, because, obviously by this point she's already established this franchise. This is kind of more of a prequel story, really, although she kind of jumped, her and then her son later on who would kind of pick up the mantle mostly after she unfortunately passed away. They would jump around the history of this world, but this story was really the first time we really got a sense of how it all got started. We're reading the initial kind of characters who kind of made this world what it was. And it's fascinating to see, humanity working with nature to combat something in nature, and creating something beautiful out of it. Like, the dragon riders, have become like the pride of this world. And it's this amazing bond that certain humans get to have with these animals. And it's an incredible thing. And to do something positive with nature, it's an example of a story where science goes right. Again, we have a lot of stories where we mess with nature, it going horribly wrong. And again, I love those stories too. When we talked about Watchers on this show, we talked about Midnight a little bit. I love those kinds of scary stories. But I'm also a big proponent of science. I'm also a big believer that science will ultimately, if there is such a thing as salvation for us, it's through science. It's through us. There's nothing going to come around and do anything for us to save. We have to save ourselves. And we have to stop being afraid of our own ingenuity, afraid of our own ability to kind of affect the natural world. So yes, if you misuse science, it'll be misused. But if you do it right, something incredible can come out of it. And that's what happens in this story. It's showing the power of science. It's showing what happens when an entire kind of society essentially bands behind scientists and puts their trust in them. And the things we can achieve when no one's trying to impede progress, when no one is, letting fear. I mean, granted, there are some people who are a little like, about this. It's not all hunky-dory. There are some villains, if you will, in this. But as a whole, people get behind this idea. And, aside from just, creating, a biological countermeasure to fight threat, we create something incredible. The dragons themselves are enamored with them. They're incredible. What they can do, what they represent, the bond that they can form with people is something that is completely unprecedented in human history. So for us, it's not just, hey, we found, a weapon to fight something off. It's we've created a new facet of our lives that is unlike anything that came before. And it was through science. It was through our ingenuity. It's through our ability to kind of not only understand nature, but learn how to push it in certain ways that don't, kind of deface it, but kind of help it out. I mean, the dragons essentially are just, what nature had already produced on this planet, just more, more successful at it. And in theory, could have very well been something these animals would have evolved into down the line naturally. So really, when you think about it, human beings just kind of sped up the clock a little bit here. So it's a great story about humanity banding behind heroes, and heroes who are, who are scientists, heroes who are not only celebrating but utilizing the science and for what it is, and the people who kind of ignore the science, who ignore the experts, suffer for it. And it shows that these people are not out for their own end. These people are out for the good of us all. Their job is to understand something so we can learn from it, so we can all benefit from it. They're not there for their own pride or ego. And this story very much shows that and celebrates that. Like, scientists are kind of the unsung heroes. when the chips are down, when all seems lost, they're the ones who kind of step forward and find the solutions to save us all, regardless of what your stance is, your belief is, your sexual orientation is, what color your skin is. They're going to do something that's going to help everyone across the board. And that's what happens in the story. And not only do they, essentially save humanity, but they also create a legacy on this planet that will define this planet essentially forevermore. And it's incredible. It's like a ripple effect that, goes throughout the entire history of this world that's encapsulated in all these books. So that's one of the reasons why, even though it's not the first Dragon Riders of Pern story she wrote, chronologically speaking, it's kind of the first full-length novel. There's like a short little mini story that technically takes place before this one that kind of shows an initial like scouting ship that, cataloged this planet. But I love seeing how pro-science this book is, and it exemplifies, that scientists are kind of our unsung heroes. That, if we ever want really the idea of like being able to ride on a dragon and soar through the skies, if that were to ever happen in life, it's going to happen through the power of science. It's going to be scientists who figure that out. If dragons are to ever exist ever, it's going to be because scientists figure out a way to make dragons because they weren't real. And I like that, they essentially kind of retroactively create a dragon. That's one of the reasons I love the Dragon Rise of Pern series. It's a great twist on a dragon story, how we could have dragons. Because prior to reading the books, I had always kind of thought maybe it's like a fantasy story, like an alternate Earth kind of thing. Then I started reading, like, oh wow, no, this is an alien planet, and the dragons are essentially just genetically modified aliens that just, if like looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Well, that's the dragon. They look like dragons, they act like dragons, they're big, they breathe fire, they fly. Dragons works for us. So, Dragonsdawn. Have you read it? If so, what did you think? Have you read all the other Dragons Riders or Pern books? How do you feel this one fits into the overall chronology? What does this one kind of rank up on your list of favorite Pern books? If you haven't read this book and you haven't read any of the Dragon Riders or Pern books, I would actually recommend start with this one. It's not the first one, but start with it. When I was reading these books, I actually read them in chronological order as opposed to kind of publication order. Because I liked it, because again, it bounces all around different kind of histories of this world. So I thought to myself, well, one of the benefits of having discovered this series so much later in life is that there's a lot of material out there. So why not just read it kind of in the chronological order and kind of follow the history of this world? And that's kind of the benefit you can, get from kind of reading this book, this franchise kind of in hindsight, so to speak. So if you haven't read any of the Dragon Riders of Pern books, I would say start with this one. Start with how it got started, because if you're just jumping into it fresh, it might be a lot to take in because there's so much material in this world. There's so many books that have been written. There's so much history that it might be a little lost. You might be overwhelmed. Start in the beginning. See how this world came to be. See how these people came to be this world. See how the dragons came to be. Start from the beginning of this world and kind of follow it from there. So you kind of discover it as, the characters you'll come across in all these different books come across it as well. And it'll probably help you understand this world a lot faster than if you just jump in somewhere in the middle. Which, whatever. I mean, these are great books. So if you just want to pick one up now and you just happen, it's not this one, but you see, like all the Wares of Pern or the Renegades of Pern on a bookshelf, and you just say, hey, I want to start with that. Go ahead, which, by the way, we'll be talking about a lot of these other books on this show, too. But if not, if you've not read any of the Pern books, start with Dragonsdawn. It's a great book on its own. Regardless of how it fits into a larger franchise, it's a fantastic story. It's easy to read. It's a fun read. It's compelling. I really, really enjoy the characters. I think the characters really just kind of jump off the screen and really kind of talk to you as the reader. And it's a great story. And if you love science, you're going to love this book. Because, again, it's very pro-science, and it shows how we can use science to not only benefit us, but really kind of pull our ass out of the fire, when need be. So, but yeah, go check it out. I'll leave some links in the description section below, as always, where you can go pick it up, check it out, come back, give me some of your thoughts to let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you guys. And as always, we'll catch you on the next one. Peace!